Good morning, good afternoon. You're with us at Cyberhuman Frontiers, the place to stay up to speed on the latest conjunction of all sorts of interrelated technologies about humans, about genetics, about biological structure imaging, about mastering the manipulation of DNA code, and about brain-computer interfaces. And we're glad that you're here with us. We want to make it interesting for you. The points of view and purpose of this video is not to incite fear or violence or harass or bully in any way, but rather to share opinions and thoughts with other like-minded individuals curious about the subject. The opinions here on this stream belong solely to the persons expressing them and are not a representation of the channel Cyberhuman Frontiers. Occasionally, we will include work from other content producers, and some of those are copyrighted, which we believe, although they are not specifically authorized to be used by the copyright holder, in good faith are protected by federal law and the Fair Use Doctrine for one or more of the reasons noted in the Copyright Act of 1976. So, tonight's topic is going a little bit further on the various uses of superparamagnetic iron oxide particles and some of the other people who are working with this to, it could be for the purpose of disease prevention or disease mitigation. It could be for the purpose of making connections into structures of the body, the organism, the human organism, if you will, for remediation of malfunctions, not necessarily a disease process. A whole lot of things going on in that. What do we mean by a superparamagnetic iron oxide particle? They don't retain the magnetism permanently, so they can be magnetized and demagnetized at will. Iron happens to be a very good element, handy for the use of exploiting magnetic properties. And iron oxide lends itself more to integration into biological structures. So using them in the application of various forms of therapy, and if they're properly applied, they can also cross certain barriers. For example, the blood-brain barrier, if properly designed and built. So the ability to target malfunctioning regions of the brain is possible. This is opening up a whole new world of delivery of medical therapeutics of various sorts or other modifications to the organism by being semi-non-invasive. And they're working toward being able to make this stuff so that it can be more seamlessly brought into, on board in the organism, so that it just increases the convenience of the whole process. We have covered a little bit of this last week. We're going to go further with it this week. Some people that you may want to check out that are all in peripherally related fields, and we've been over the course of the last number of episodes, we've brought together from various disciplines the DNA code piece with people such as George Church, mastering the manipulation of DNA code. We've brought in the imaging piece, very brilliant engineer named Mary Lou Jepson, who's an expert in imaging of all sorts. And of course, imaging biological structures would be the key there. A gentleman by the name of Ed Boyden, somewhat of a pioneer in the field of optogenetics. And of course, guys like Elon Musk, who have invested significant sums of money in building various types of brain-computer interfaces, which are in the process of refinement. You can go back and look in our archives for shows on some of these topics and get a little bit more in-depth on any one of them. So before we... TMC, how are you doing tonight?
I'm good, Indy. How are you?
I'm okay. So before we get off into anything specific, I want to bring us, hang on one second here, want to bring us up just a kind of a little bit of a recap of something that we were covering last week. I think I have it right here. All right, so got a little document here. Method and apparatus for stimulation of biological structure. Let me get the title of it right up at the top. Biological tissue. One little segment that I wanted to reread and emphasize is inventions such as this, and this one in particular, are not limited just to stimulation of the brain, but have practical advantages in a wide variety of use cases. Among other things, interferential stimulation may be precisely targeted at any deep or superficial region of the body. And that could be an organ, a brain. It could be a section of muscle tissue. It could be any place. I suppose that it might even be possible to use something like this in an area of bone marrow where stem cells reside and can perhaps be influenced or directed to migrate or programmed to migrate to a certain other location in the body for healing tissues. A lot of speculation, but a lot of possibilities. The possibilities are limitless with this stuff. In some scenarios of this invention, stimulation is targeted at particular regions of the heart or at the pineal gland deep inside the cranium or at the spinal cord. There could be a person who's had some sort of a pinched disc issue or a severed section of spinal nerves for various reasons in which they might have paralysis, the digestive tract, reproductive tissue, muscles. It's kind of got a lot more to do with where you want to go with this, with an apparatus and a method such as this. It's not really that you couldn't, set a team of people to work on a particular targeted organ. Depends on what you want to do. And there are a lot of people working on this stuff.
Can I add something to that?
Oh, please.
All right. So what it says here talks about different current channels. If you leave it right there, talks about different current channels, the antiphasic, right, current channels. And what that means is that you have 4 different places that you can control current, which means that you can insert current in a certain field, one of 2 fields that you have in this particular application. You can insert current both directions, so positive and negative, which means that you can have a biased current, positive or negative, between 2 points of contact out of a total of 4. And in this case, they're using contact electrodes, stimulating electrodes to do that. And so what they're getting at here is that very, very sophisticated applications of current that can basically interfere, overlap inside the brain, and they can steer and direct and locate specific centers in the brain up to and including the pineal gland, and talk to it, stimulate it. When I say talk to it, I don't mean necessarily, what I'm saying is you can interact with it. You can do something with it and repeat the application of stimulation, right? You repeat the stimuli and it does the same thing again. And then you go, that's interesting. And you do the same thing again. And you understand as you make subtle changes, let's change the current on electrode A versus electrode B, or D versus C. And then start doing it in different patterns to see what directions you can get different neural currents to fire, up, down, left, right, and then in what sequence. And then nested neural stimulation really is where you can take complex neural firing. If you can get these things in the right timing, you can start stacking signals in the brain one on top of the other. So as they disperse, as they interact, the signals compress and decompress, almost like compressing an email, if you will, sending it to somebody and then decompressing it and getting a larger amount of information out.
They spell it out pretty well here. They're talking about either in-phasic or anti-phasic, and they're talking about pairs. And of course, you expanded it to what they naturally would do, which is instead of just a pair, you're going to have multiple ones. And they allude to different patterns, and this would likely be interfering patterns of these multiple sources of energy, and they're either going to be additive or they're going to be destructive to each other at particular focal locations.
The pairs of stimulating electrodes positioned side by side versus across the head, what they're talking about is something that you have on the left side of your head, 2 points of contact. So if you were to look at something like a modern AirPod, a headphone that emits capacitive electric fields, you could have 2, 3, 4, 5 different capacitive electric fields formed on the left earphone, right? The left side of your head.
Right.
And then you could have a whole different set of 2, 3, 4, 5 different capacitive fields on the right side of your head that do exactly this. They create electric fields that you can steer not only on specifically the right side versus the left, but as they broadcast out in a sphere or in a direction, because you can start making shapes, you can start creating directionality with these fields as you stack them one on top of the other. And if you can steer them into the nerves in the side of the head or the face or into the brain, and do that on both sides of the head, and then start doing biphasic or binaural beats would be another common term that people would understand. You can start oscillating and modulating the nervous system up to and including affecting organ function and all kinds of other stuff. But
it should be noted.
It's all speculation for your entertainment.
It should be noted, TMC, that let's say that you espouse the notion that human beings were either created or evolved in such a way that they are in a proper appointment of defenses for the environment in which they live. And what do I mean by that? I mean by, if you get hit by a rock, your skull has a thick bone structure to protect your brain. If you are chemically assaulted by something or other, your skin protects you. If you are assaulted by a bug, a bacterium, or whatever it might be, your immune system protects you. But this is my point. When we're talking about electromagnetics, the environment of the Earth that we have come to be living in is one that does not have a whole lot of really strong electromagnetic fields. They are there, and there are natural ones that are there, make no mistake, but they're very subtle. Subtle Earth's magnetic field, subtle magnetic perturbations coming from the sun. So we have either been created or evolved in such a way that we have strong defenses against somebody throwing a rock at your head or getting a nasty bug. But we don't have, and we didn't need to have, a strong defense against electromagnetic input. Now this gets to the summation of my point. Biological structures are highly, highly sensitive to electromagnetics. Why? They use it themselves. And B, the environment, the natural environment, never had a whole lot of really strong electromagnetics in it. They were subtle. So now, when you take a pair of whatever type of, consumer device that you want, and it's got some programmed and purpose designed communications or data streams that result in electromagnetics coming out of them, it's really very easy to broadcast that from the distance of a pair of headphones worn on your ears into the brain just a few inches away, and really create a remarkable influence on those biological structures inside. So it's really a great area to exploit when you want to make a change in the way that an organism functions. See what I'm getting at?
Yeah, so if we want to talk about capacitive fields and electric fields and electromagnetics, with something like a set of AirPods, not only do you have the sensing fields that are used to orient the headphone and understand where sounds are coming from, to improve clarity, like sound quality, clarity, and noise mitigation and all of that. You also have the antennas that are used to connect the AirPod, the headphone,
outside
to the device, right, to your cell phone or to your smartwatch or to whatever the new thing is.
Yep.
And what we're really talking about at this point are body area networks. And these are networks that function in close proximity to the body, something like 6 feet or less. Anything within a 6-foot sphere of view would be something that you could address or map as a body area network. So how does that apply in real life? Something like your AirPods, something like your watch, or something like your phone. If it is by you and only you for the majority of time, and if at the same time you can log that you're awake, you're moving, you're at work, you're doing this, that, or the other, you set up a sequence of data points that allow the internet, that allow the cloud, that allows AI,
the connected system, whatever it is,
to know that it's you, and to know what you are and who you are and how you feel and your essence, your energy, your resonance. And something like a set of AirPods, going back to headphones, not only do you have the sensing fields to let it know if it's in your ear, and if so, how far, and all of that. And it's measuring your physiologic characteristics, what's your heart rate, and all of that. It's also broadcasting electromagnetics, and the frequencies that it broadcasts at 2.4 gigahertz. Those frequencies in the near field do things different than in the far field. You have near field characteristics in electromagnetics, and you have far field characteristics in electromagnetics. When you're dealing with near field, the brain happens to be inside the near field of a 2.4 gigahertz frequency. Right. So when the brain is in that near field, you can then begin to turn off and turn on the antennas in specific ways that aren't necessarily regulated the same way as the way that frequency interacts with the human body when it's in the far field. Remember, there are two different fields. There's a near field and a far field for electromagnetics.
I'm going to want you to explain more of that. This is interesting.
When you look at the electric field versus the magnetic field in a near field, they don't interact with each other the same way. They're not considered linear. They're considered nonlinear. When they're in the far field, when you look at one, you understand more about the other, the electric field versus the magnetic field, when it's in the far field. So when you look at organizations like the FCC, for example, when they give you information, a lot of it has to deal with the far field characteristics, because they know people aren't going to be right next to a transmitter. Oh, wait, you are right next to a transmitter. It's in your phone. And when you start thinking about what does your phone transmit, it has all kinds of different antennas that do all kinds of different things, and they do it in very, very different ways. And the FCC is grossly lacking, in my opinion, as it relates to the attention they're giving or not giving to the therapeutic effects or the adverse health effects of something like a modern cell phone. And you can argue all day long whether or not it affects biological systems or not, but there are adequate studies out now that illustrate very clearly that very, very, very low levels of electromagnetics, whether it be an electric field or a magnetic field or an electromagnetic field, period. Very low levels do things like change and disrupt normal calcium or potassium function with the ion channels in your brain and your nervous system. And you can argue all day long whether or not the economic implications or the economic benefit to having an electromagnetic system out in your environment outweighs the risks, because the risks are so low and everything goes back to normal after you're modulated in these fields for some period of time. But the fact of the matter is we're building AI systems at this point that understand and can have access to data sets that understand biologic tissue and understand how electricity transmits through biologic tissue. And to map that and understand that and know that simply means that you are beginning to unlock and understand how the nervous system and the brain talks with the rest of the body.
Yep, for one thing, right.
You can do that over the internet. That opens up a whole nother set of tools, whether you want to use them for offense or defense or to learn or for whatever. What it does is provide a new set of tools that are now available to those that have access to those tools.
Well, this TMC, this is tying into what to me almost seems like, I mean, for just for your entertainment, the elephant in the room is the way that organisms are designed. They're well prepared to ward off any sort of a biological assault, a chemical assault, a mechanical assault, because those have always been present in our environment. And the idea of getting inside by way of something that we don't have an evolved defense for, if you were to put, just taking a guess, if you were to put some sort of metrics on what types of electromagnetic fields in nature are around us and what the relative field strength of those is, just what comes from the earth, just what comes from the sun, or even, cosmic energy coming from other parts of the solar system, versus taking a device like this and literally outfitting yourself with it for cellular and organic structures that never did evolve to have some sort of a protection for that it's really a great area to exploit, because you can create powerful influences on the cellular processes if you know what you're doing with those electromagnetics.
It's resonance. It's all about resonance. And so electromagnetics is only a piece. There are different ways to interact with the environment. And when you say interact or change or interfere or perturb to induce a change.
For you to interact with the environment, or for the environment to interact with you?
What I'm saying is that electromagnetics is not the be all end all only way that you can introduce a perturbation, introduce a change into the environment that ultimately interacts with biology. It's not the only thing. You can do it with sound. You can do it with light, which technically is electromagnetic energy. But when you really want to get down to the nuts and bolts of how this stuff interacts with biology, it has to do with finding the right resonant characteristics, using the correct modality, the correct perturbation modality, which is a very fancy way of just saying, are you using electromagnetics, or are you using a sound wave? Are you using light, or are you using a microwave? Are you using a hammer, or are you using a feather? What are you using to interact with your environment? And so if you can find the right thing, and then with that particular thing that you've chosen, in your example, you used electromagnetics. If you find the right resonant characteristic, if you find the right way that you can apply electromagnetics to a cell, to a tissue, to an organ, so that you can create a known, repeatable
result. Change, yep.
Right.
But you could also do it with pressure waves. You could do it with acoustic pressure waves as well. I see your point, and I don't refute it. I don't.
And electromagnetics are an absolutely great example to use, specifically because they also create pressure waves.
That's right.
When they transfer into tissue.
That's right.
Yeah.
And we could go further if you want to talk about some sort of optical influence on something. If you have managed to get some sort of a designed device or particle that is electromagnetically sensitive to gather and absorb that electromagnetic energy, it can then emit a different frequency, perhaps in the form of light or a vibration, any of a number of other things. So these things can be converted from one energy form to another based on what you're beaming, what type of an object you're beaming it at. So you're not wrong. You open up the complexity of the whole subject.
Yeah, you're talking about transduction. So the human organism is a transducer. It's an antenna, but it's also a transducer. It's able to take one form of energy and convert it into another form of energy. And it does that for communication purposes and or for its own energy consumption and or expenditure of energy.
Sure. Nerve cells take chemical energy and convert it into electricity for the purpose of transmitting it to adjacent neurons or muscle nerves or cells or whatever.
It's a transducer. And so to your
point what we mean by transducing.
Right. To your point about light, if you were to introduce something into the body or the brain that functions as a transducer that's able to emit light, for example, you would just need to have a material that you could stimulate somehow. You could either stimulate it right next to the tissue, or you could stimulate it on top of the body with something that you wear, or you can apply electromagnetic energy, as one example of many, to the body to stimulate something that responds to a particular resonance, to a known frequency or a known match, a known lock and key, a known resonance. And if you can do that, if it's the right material, then you can excite that material that's inside the body, in this case, the brain, and you can get that material to eject or emit its its own energy. And it doesn't necessarily have to be the same thing as what was exciting it in the first place. So you could use something like a magnetic field to get a particle inside the body to become excited, and it basically jumps an energy layer, and in that jump, it emits a photon. So instead of it emitting a magnetic effect all the time, after a certain amount of excitation, it emits a photon. And at that point, then you can excite it again. It'll charge, and then boom, it might emit another photon. And then you can get it to excite again, charge, boom, get it to emit another photon. And if you had hundreds, thousands, or millions of these things strategically deposited throughout the brain, you have a wireless optogenetic interface that talks to something like a complex phased array electromagnetic system that exists in a modern house or in a modern city, modern society, all through transduction, converting one form of energy into another.
Yep. So I'm just going to read some of these things. This is a DARPA publication. It's not real new, 2019, but always keep in mind that things advance, and we may not have the latest press release, but we certainly can give you this. So they're featuring 6 different methods based on the topic up here. 6 different paths to the non-surgical future of brain-machine interfaces, 6 of them. So they all will have various applications in which they're the optimal one to use. One is to develop a minutely invasive interface that pairs an external transceiver with electromagnetic nano transducers, which, even better, are non-surgically delivered. So when we say non-surgical, that means that it's really pretty non-invasive. They can be absorbed, they can be injected, absorbed through the skin, gotten into the blood plasma somehow, and then they're built to migrate to a certain area. Those nanotransducers would convert electrical signal from neurons into magnetic signals that could then be recorded and processed externally, and vice versa, enabling bidirectional communication. So one group working on that. Next one, a completely non-invasive device, this is at Carnegie Mellon, that uses an Acousto-optical approach to record from the brain and the interfering electrical fields to write to specific neurons. This team will use ultrasound waves to guide light into the brain and to detect neural activity. Their approach exploits the nonlinear response of neurons to electric fields. I'm not quite sure that I know what that means. Nonlinear response of neurons to electric fields to enable localized stimulation of specific cell types. Well, that's very interesting.
So a nonlinear response, think of it like
turns it on or turns it off.
No. Think of it like a lightning bolt coming down, but it's not just a single lightning bolt. It's the kind that spider webs out, and or a tree root, for example. And if you were to map every one of those little delicate fingerlings all the way out to the end of the root, or all the way out to the end of that flash of lightning, right? If you were to map every one of those and then assign a value, this has this many volts, or this much current, or this much amplitude.
That's where it ties into specific cell types rather than a specific targeted nerve cell, right?
Correct, because the way that the energy moves through the tissue has an effect, as does what tissue ultimately is stimulated beyond the point that it's going to create an action potential and fire.
Yep. That's making sense now.
Once it does that, it generates its own currents, which is why it's nonlinear. Because if you generate your own currents as you're driving currents to begin with, right? So you're stimulating tissue, knowing that the tissue is going to itself then stimulate because of the original stimulation you're providing it. It is then a nonlinear effect.
Yep. Interesting. Thanks for that explanation. The next one really throws me for a loop because I don't understand this one either. At Johns Hopkins, under Principal Investigator David Blodgett, their aim is to develop a completely non-invasive, coherent optical system for recording from the brain. But the part that I don't quite understand on this one is that the system will directly measure optical path length changes in neural tissue that correlate with neural activity. And to my thinking, the shape and design and approximate positioning of neurons is relatively fixed. You know, they're a certain number of millimeters away from each other or whatever, and they're not moving around. So when you directly measure the optical path length change in neural tissue, I don't understand how that correlates with neural activity personally.
So what I can tell you from my own research is that when they look at the brain and they look at neurons, right? If they're shining light on them and it's focused light like a laser, then when the neuron fires, when the neuron gets excited, it changes its morphology or its characteristics. And so if you were to take a laser beam or a few of them in a fixed position, for example, and stimulate the brain and use that light, what limited light you had, right?
You're telling me these things stretch? You're telling me that an axon stretches and shrinks when it's getting ready to fire?
No. What I'm telling you is how many laser beams can you shine all the way through the brain and measure the light from those laser beams, send and receive, how many laser beams can you shine through the brain in a grid or whatever, and measure the change in every one of the neurons that you can with that light.
I don't know. Could be quite
Me neither. And then it gets into, well, can you steer the light around? And how well are the algorithms so that as the human is moving around, the light is compensated for. So you have to understand complete and total three-dimensional awareness, 3D spatial awareness, which is what they use for things like Pokemon Go and all the VR and AR, all that lidar technology that gives you really cool pictures and high-def shit at night and all that. Well, it's the same kind of technology where if you were in that video frame or you had those lidar lasers shining in your face, how good are the machine learning algorithms to shine light through your skin and start looking at your tissues while you're moving around in three-dimensional space, up to and including looking at the roughening of the neurons firing in things like your peripheral nervous system at your elbow, wrist, and maybe your
Yep. I would think there'd be other factors that they might want to quantify too, which is the relative reflectivity or absorption of that laser light energy, depending on the state that the neuron or its peripheral appendages, which would be the axons and the dendrites, are. So that might change as well. Could
so here's the other thing about that.
At particular frequencies too.
Yeah, they say here coherent optical systems. Just bear in mind, when you see the word optical or you see the word light, that is simply a specific frequency on the electromagnetic spectrum. It has nothing to do with any kind of exclusivity of its characteristics outside of its unique wavelength and the energy that it carries.
Well, there's more.
Directly related to its wavelength.
There's more.
No, nothing else is different.
No, there's more. It's coherent also, which implies that it's a laser.
Right, but you can create coherent electromagnetic waves. You can create coherent microwaves. You can create coherent millimeter waves. You can create coherent infrared rays. You can create coherent gamma rays and X-rays. You can create coherent energy. You can create coherent sound waves. And have giant sound cannons that just completely dissolve tissues. Humans just turn into puddles of goo with directed energy sound cannons. This is, anyway, go ahead.
All right. Anyway, overall here, in overview, 6 different paths to non-surgical future of brain-machine interfaces. Of course, always keep in the back of your mind, why would they want to do this? But hey, you know, just something you can figure out, something you can get a great team of engineers working on and throw a few millions, billions of dollars at it, and lo and behold, you've figured out how to do something that I don't know why anybody would ever want to do. But that's beside the point. Next, the Park team, under principal investigator Dr. Krishnan Thayagarajan, aims to develop a non-invasive acousto-magnetic. Already we're looking at transduction there because we're converting from acoustics to magnetics. Non-invasive acousto-magnetic device for writing to the brain. So they use pairs of ultrasound waves. So whenever you have a pair of waves, depending on the frequencies of each, you're going to set up an area, a focal point, where those two of the pair of waves will either be stronger or weaker. You can focus the energy.
Would read that sentence again. It says their approach pairs ultrasound with magnetic fields.
With magnetic fields, right.
Keep going.
Good point. To generate localized electric currents for neuromodulation. Interesting. The hybrid approach offers the potential for localized neuromodulation deeper in the brain. And I think one reason for that might be that there are different penetration characteristics of the ultrasound versus the magnetic field. So when using them together, it's really like science fiction stuff.
All right. So here's this about that. You're dead on. The ultrasound, if you change the frequency of the ultrasound, you can regulate very specifically how deep you go into the brain with focused ultrasound. Right? And so the magnetic field transduction piece is if you can have materials deep inside the brain that respond to ultrasound, then you use the right frequency because then you get the right depth, and then you can apply the right intensity and the right focus to get to the materials at the right depth in the brain that you want. And then the magnetic fields are emitted from the materials as they're excited, right? And the magnetic fields don't necessarily have to be very giant magnetic fields because you only want local stimulation. So you can use very, very weak signaling to generate very, very weak transduction so that you get very, very gentle magnetic oscillation to deep into the brain. And here's why does it matter in the brain? Well, if you generate a magnetic field, you automatically get an electric field when you are generating a magnetic field in conductive materials or conductive tissue, and the brain is conductive. So if you can generate a magnetic field deep down inside the brain without any wires, then you also are able to generate electric fields deep down inside the brain without any wires. And when you look at electromagnetics and again, how they transduce into ultrasound in the brain, what's stopping something like a pulse modulated ultra wideband chirp to pulse through tissue and generate the right ultrasonic oscillation, the right ultrasonic frequency, think carrier wave and signal wave, to then start modulating materials in the body that in turn, in this example, generate a magnetic field, which then turns into an electric field in something like the brain or in nervous system tissue, in the peripheral nervous system. You got to think, if you had something that was growing in your body and it was looking for a particular kind of cell, like maybe a neuron, if it started to grow in your body in something like a thigh or a tricep or a hamstring, right, then it might find the neural population type it's looking for in the peripheral nervous system of something like your femur or your bicep or your armpit. And then maybe it makes its way to your heart or your lungs or your kidney.
This one really fascinates me, this Park team thing. And it's because of what they're combining together. We don't understand everything. You know, we're not engineers. We're not advanced PhD scientists. We read what we have here and we do our best to interpret. We have some technical background, though, to be fair. I do understand the part about setting up a magnetic field. And that's not just setting up a static magnetic field. That would also be something that is oscillating or modulating in some way. And that there is going to be electric current that's generated. The part that I have a hard time wrapping my head around is how they use this so that they can target very, very specific areas. So pairing the ultrasound with, it is pairing ultrasound energy with magnetic field energy, and then that targeting takes place. Localized electric currents for neuromodulation. And of course, you wouldn't even try to do this unless you were able to focus and target it. Because if you just turn the whole brain on or just stimulate it, what are you going to get? You're just going to get an organism that's just hyperactivated in every way and might even hurt it. So they definitely have designs on using this to focus precisely. And I don't understand how this works, but it's fascinating. And then it offers the potential for localized neuromodulation. And they do want to get deeper into the brain. They don't want to be just on a superficial area of the brain. They want to get to deep to inner brain tissue. There are all sorts of various structures way deep buried in the brain that are important and that could be valuable for them to exploit being able to communicate with them or stimulate or inhibit them. So that one of all of them, that one really fascinates me the most. But I haven't read them all yet either. The next one, Dr. Jacob Robinson at Rice University is aiming to develop a minutely invasive bidirectional system for recording from and writing to the brain. Okay, how? The interface will use diffuse optical tomography. All right. Optical tomography to infer neural activity by measuring light scattering in neural tissue. Okay. So we may have some sort of a rotating, scanning optical input.
See, that's the older guy side of you. So you're thinking rotating, scanning radar. Think phased array systems that are flat on a plate or something that looks like an EEG, but instead of it being electrodes, there are a bunch of lasers. There are a bunch of infrared lasers that they know what direction that they're going to shoot the laser light through the brain. If they put a helmet on your head and it has a bunch of holders for lasers to go into it,
yep.
And they can map the brain once all the lasers are set up for the experiment, right? They shine all the light through and they have a bunch of cameras that can measure all this stuff, and they don't necessarily have to have a camera that measures infrared light. Yep. They can use things like ultrasound to measure what the light is doing in the brain as they map and orient. Because there's something that's called photoacoustic tomography, where they actually use the light to rapidly heat up and expand the tissue and then allow it to contract. And if you had a bunch of lasers wrapped around the head and you're just shooting it into the head, right? The laser light, all of it, 30, 40, 50 of them at the same time. And you're able to take sensitive ultrasonic transducers to measure the acoustic waves that are made inside the tissue. Then you can start mapping what directions the light is going at the right time with the other lasers and what direction they're going at the right time to understand how you can get tissues to start oscillating in the right places at the right time, which does things like mechanically generate electric fields in the brain. Go ahead.
All right, so we have the last sentence in this thing. I'd like you to just speculate on this one. To enable the right function, the team will use a magnetogenetic approach. Don't be afraid of these big words. It's really pretty simple here. Magneto is nothing but, magnetic particle, magnetism being used for something. But they're combining that and calling it a magnetogenetic approach. So now I say, aha. So what we're doing here is we're doing something where we're genetically designing something to make the target organic structure magnetically sensitive, which is exactly what they say. So these guys have whatever branch of their team is working on that particular compound or designed nanoparticle to make neurons sensitive to magnetic fields. That's kind of a biggie. And I won't tell you how to connect the dots because, of course, our show and our streams are for entertainment purposes only. But when you're talking about making neurons sensitive to magnetic fields and using a genetic approach, then I hearken back to last week's episode. We were talking about spions, which, those being superparamagnetic ferrous oxide particles, nanoparticles. So just, one way, you're going to want to get those things in there and then have them alter the structure of those neurons to make them sensitive to magnetic fields.
So people would like to know.
Inquiring minds like to know.
If your cells are responsive now to something like a magnet, well, what's your cell going to do, or what types of stimuli would interact with your cells? And there are a few. The first one is rapidly heating of the magnetic cell, right? Because you have created a biologic code that tells the cell to make and stack and locate and concentrate magnetic material, what they call ferritin, biologic ferritin, which is just iron.
Okay, yep.
Right. So if you can concentrate and stack and make a ferritin capsule, if you will, and have that ferritin, that biologic iron, concentrated and located at one place or a few places in the cell or at the cell wall, now all of a sudden you can talk to that, you can stimulate that and do things like get it to heat up. And if you get it to heat up, maybe the cell responds then to the change in heat. The other thing you can do with it is if you are sophisticated enough with something like a genetically engineered magnetoprotein, if you were to understand and map how the little iron crystals were formed, you would be able to understand how to put that particular ferritin globule or that ferritin knob, and you'd be able to twist it and turn it and torque it, because you would be able to map and understand how it responded in the magnetic fields going up, down, left, right, twisting and torsion on an axis, the pitch and the yaw and the roll, if you will.
Yep.
To understand how the little magnetic crystal packet that is grown with magnetogenetics, how that functions in its new little microbiome ecosystem environment that is your own tissue with a magnetically active cell. You could heat it up and you can get the cell to respond with temperature. You have the torque where you can get the little knob to move left, right, up or down, and the pitch and the yaw, the roll, right? But then you also have plain old transduction, where you induce a magnetic field and you have a magnetically responsive protein in there that ultimately provides the handoff to generate an electric field to stimulate the cell in some form. Typically, it's done with heat and with torque. So you have a mechanical manipulation and you have heat. So not only can you twist, but you could just bang on it. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, where you don't have to necessarily heat it up, where you're moving through the numbers at, doing mock Jesus, for example, where you're just like you're like trying to heat up, turn something red or turn on a light bulb or charge up an engine, right? That's one way to do it. The other way to do it is to bang on it. It's knock on it, ding, 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 ding. Because again, if you get the right resonance, if you can oscillate a cell, if you can oscillate one cell or a family of cells at 8 hertz or at 10 hertz, and at the same time, you have another set of cells that have their own unique characteristics, and you oscillate those at 10 hertz or 12 hertz, and then you have the 8 hertz and the 10 hertz or the 12 hertz, right? You have those things going at the same time. You can start creating like an orchestra in the brain with different overlapping nested oscillations, because you have these different tabs that are responsive to magnetic proteins that all have their own unique crystal resonance because it's biologic material. And this is really the beauty of it all, is that once the crystals are grown, once they're in place, then you get your unique identification. You get your own QR code, and you don't know what your QR code looks like until your QR code is grown enough and crystallized enough so that it becomes uniquely identifiable at distance. Once it's uniquely identifiable at distance, you're on the network. And at that point, you have an anode or a cathode basically on your arm, which is why you're seeing the things light up, like the light bulbs light up on people's arms. But anyway, I'll stop now.
I wish you'd continue a little further. But that's
yeah,
okay.
well, everyone's going to be their own little Tesla tower. And what they don't really tell you is that, you know, the types of energy that potentially flows through a human organism is far beyond, you know, just transmitting a general oscillation to turn on a light bulb at your arm. To be able to create complex harmonics inside of a human organism and extract the information out, you're literally, it's like milking a soul, or it's like milking a consciousness, because you're overriding and overlapping whatever's naturally happening with the universe. And you start building these transduction systems and start interfering with the human organism with scalar type technologies. Who knows what they're milking? Who knows what they're milking through these AI interfaces? And where is all that milk? Where's all that milk and honey going? Where is that going? Anyway.
Milk and honey. I guess just as a little background comment, I would recommend to people that there are a number of other journalists on other platforms who are highlighting some of the possible uses and applications of combination magnetic genetic approaches to alter the structure and configuration and the function of neurons and other cells in bodies. And they're talking about spions, for example, talking about purpose-designed particles, nanoparticles. And there's a lot that you can read and you can find out there on the internet about this stuff. We don't want to cover all of it here. We mainly want to just kind of whet people's appetite and then go into some specific things when we read from actual data from actual companies and what they're doing. A lot of other people speculate, and you're free to do so as well, and put on your science fiction cap and figure out where it might go or where it might be going that you have not been fully informed about or didn't avail yourself of all the information out there. What we're bringing to you here is factual information of what these groups are actually doing. But I would encourage further thought and investigation in this area. And if you want to call it, for your entertainment, that's good. If you want to call it, to improve your knowledge base so that you're more aware of what might be coming down the pike, that's good too. However you want to characterize it for your own use is fine. And I have another one to read here. The Teledyne team, under principal investigator Dr. Patrick Connolly, aims to develop a completely non-invasive, integrated device that uses micro-optically pumped magnetometers. So they're going to be detecting magnetism at very, very, very small scales.
These are nano diamonds. Maybe one example would be like a nano diamond with a nitrogen vacancy. And you can structure the nitrogen vacancy to do things like emit light, and the same thing, nitrogen vacancy structured in specific ways can sense magnetic fields, because you can pump light through a nitrogen vacancy and measure the change in the spins of the proverbial photons. And so at that point, you can start doing things like run quantum sensors. And the quantum sensor in a biologic application opens up a whole new world of possibilities. If you can, integrate a biologic organism onto a quantum internet, who the hell knows what happens at that point? But go ahead.
Yeah, pretty well. All right. So this one, the Teledyne team, will focus on ultrasound for writing to neurons using ultrasound. Non-invasive, a device using micro optically pumped magnetometers to detect localized magnetic fields. That localized magnetic field that's detective correlates with neural activity.
Seems complex, huh? So here's this about that. If
Again, there's a combination of two things going on here. Localized magnetic fields and then ultrasound, which echoes back to one of the other ones that we read above.
Yeah, so if this stuff's at the nano scale, I've got a couple different patents to show pictures, but we showed the construction of a nanosphere, basically, where it looks like a jawbreaker, layer upon layer upon layer upon layer, and that's really how this stuff is going to be done. It's going to be complex compositing, where you have multiple particles that are attached together. This is at the nano scale, that talk to each other, but also interact with the environment and do so in elegant ways. And the greater the sophistication at the nano scale, the more compact and precise and ruggedized it's going to get. So it's no different than running from like a floppy disk to a SCADA drive to now we have solid state hard drives, right? Where instead of having a disk that spins around and the motor burns out and you lost your hard drive, we moved into solid state. It's that kind of a proverbial progression with the nanoscale as well, where you have these schools working on one specification, one specialty or two specialties, and they collaborate and interact with each other. And the real magic happens when you have the corporate sector come in and interface with the schools. And when that happens, you start getting cross-school collaboration, and you get corporate research and development money and military money basically all mixing around and flowing around, and you start pulling in people that are really good biochemists, for example, that could stack all of this stuff together in a single stable stack, a single stable cassette that enables complex, intentional delivery systems that do whatever it is they're doing.
You know, I had a thought. I wonder how each of these subgroups that are all working in semi-collaborative, semi-synergistic areas defend the results of their own intellectual property based on the budgets that they got for what they were doing. You know, I mean, there are going to be some egos involved here. So I wonder how, when we talk about sharing, where the dividing line is, you know, and where, like, when they want to play nice with each other, or when and if they say, well, no, this is ours, we own this, you know, this is our thing, and you got your thing and you had your own budget. Or I wonder if all of that money is coming from like one big umbrella organization up above, and they all get word from way up above where the big money bags are that, you know what, you all play nice and we'll keep funding all of you. So just keep working together, because this is what we want. And we want you all to give us a final integrated product that will do something very powerful. I wonder how that really works.
Well, I think that it ultimately manifests in the final product, right? You're saying that ultimately where you get something that's nice and compact and concise and something you can bring to market for, you know.
Well, I think the answer is ultimately follow the money. Follow the money.
But when you look at where these final products are perhaps being made, these are made privately.
Mm-hmm.
These would be like, here, you already work on DARPA programs. You already work on highly classified, you know, level 4 National Institute of Health, National Institute of Infectious Disease programs. You already have the security clearances that meet the standards for the highest level classifications for a general citizen of the United States, for example. So you're familiar with non-disclosure. You're familiar with what happens if you violate non-disclosure. You're familiar with what happens if you violate whatever it is that you've also been exposed to, because probably the dirtiest, darkest people are going to come see you that you're comfortable with when you have the discussion of, let's go work at this private laboratory. And if you ever say anything about even being here, we'll find you and your family and their family and their family, that kind of stuff. And then it's made privately. And, you know, then it's perhaps lifted and delivered over into China.
Yep.
Into one of their laboratories. And what you have is a complex tech transfer that may or may not have, you know, had military involvement, had private industry involvement, had school involvement. What I mean by that is a high-level school like Harvard or MIT or Virginia Tech or Georgia Tech or Florida Tech or Dartmouth or Purdue or any of them. Yep. Any of them. Caltech. There's intellectual property galore everywhere. And to build sophisticated systems to even get them outside of the country would be an accomplishment. To build packaging systems that allow for complex nanotechnology to move as a working model through a commercial airport system, international, into another country like China, just having the mechanisms to do that undetected would be amazing. Not to mention whatever it is you're trying to smuggle in the first damn place. Anyway.
All sorts of possibilities, right?
Yeah. Well, we could probably ask little Chucky Lieber and figure it out, you know, but who knows?
Well, conclusion on this little piece, combining all of these, of at least of these six, which are six that we know of, six methods to accomplish this. All of this research will benefit from insights provided by independent, ethical, and legal experts who have agreed to provide insight on progress and potential future military and civilian applications and implications of the technology. Whole lot of words saying, I don't know what. Additionally, federal regulators are cooperating with DARPA to help make the teams better understand human use clearance as research gets underway, blah, blah. As the work progresses, these regulators will help guide strategies for submitting applications for investigational device exemptions and investigational new drugs to enable human trials of N3 systems during the last phase of the 4-year implementation program. Okay, I'm curious about the timing of that. If N3 is successful, we will end up with wearable neural interface systems that can communicate with the brain from a range of just a few millimeters, moving neurotech beyond the clinic and into practical use. And of course, their whole bent, you know, since it's DARPA, their whole bent is always emphasizing national security, but there are going to be some consumer and big data spin-offs from this as well. And anyway, so that's DARPA. But one thing I wanted to go back to here was one of these things. Okay, this one, this PARC team one again. And just from this sentence, if we're talking about something that might happen at the level of you and me in our home and neighborhood, the approach using a combination of ultrasound waves and magnetic fields to accomplish neuromodulation. And I just want to just offer for your entertainment the idea that your smartphone has acoustic transducers on it, and they are easily and well capable of delivering ultrasonic frequencies, maybe not the intensity needed to penetrate into a brain, but who knows? I'm not quite sure. That transducer has a very wide frequency range. You only hear in the audible sound range. But that thing, yeah.
Can I add? I know I'm overstepping, and I'm.
No, it's good.
Right. So, how do I say this? Let's just say it this way.
I mean, you're carrying around a combination ultrasound and magnetic field device.
The antennas do both of those things. So the coils in the back of your phone to charge your phone, the Qi wireless coils, right? Those are used for a variety of things. They charge your phone, but they're also a sensor. They're also a proximity sensor and a near field payment device thing, right? So you can exchange information. it sends out low frequency magnetic fields. It sends out low frequency electromagnetic fields. So you have your magnetic field right there. The ultrasound comes into play, in my view, just to keep this simple, would be something like taking the antennas that use the higher frequencies, your ultra wideband antenna that runs between generally 3 gigahertz up to around 12. You have your Bluetooth, your Wi-Fi, and your general cell tower antenna that runs from, low 700 megahertz up to like 3 gigahertz. So now you've got something that has many, many, many gigahertz worth of frequency spectrum, not including the new 5G stuff that's going to push 24 gigahertz, 28 gigahertz, 60 gigahertz, which is already standard. What I'm getting at is you have a wide band of frequencies to start pulsing and chirping energy out, while, keep in mind, you have the low frequency magnetic field that's potentially being oscillated out with the Qi wireless charger on the back of your phone. So you can have this chirping with the ultra wideband frequencies that you have, pulsing your tissues, generating those rapid expansions and contractions, right? Generating those rapid electric fields as they rise and fall. And then you have this stable magnetic field that can then oscillate at 4 hertz or 5 hertz or 7 hertz in the background that can oscillate a near field like 30 feet away from the phone. So you don't have to be right next to your phone to be in the near field of a low kilohertz frequency signal that matches something like, let's go pay for this.
Your EEG.
My Apple Pay works great.
Mm-hmm.
Or my proximity sensor, which functions even lower in the lower kilohertz ranges, 1900 kilohertz or 19,000 kilohertz, whatever it is, instead of in the megahertz range. So
when we're talking about frequencies of in this case, well, just stay on just electromagnetics. We're talking about literally an orchestra of different frequencies. You can have a segment of low frequencies. You can have a segment of high frequencies. You can have a chirp. You can have a pulse. You can have what would at low resolution look like a square wave, but at high resolution, if you magnified it, it would be made up of a whole bunch of little up and down pulses. But at a macroscopic level, it might look like just a big square wave. You can have overlapping magnetic fields, which are offset in frequency from each other, so that when they cross-modulate, they create another frequency, and it's not just one. You can create multiple other frequencies by overlapping multiple primary frequencies. So there is a complete orchestra of stuff that can be done with waves. Just wanted to say that. It's like, depending on what you're trying to create as an ultimate product and where you want it to focus, you can do it. It's just, we could do a whole show just on the interplay between different wavelengths and what the resulting outputs of them are. It would be fun. Anyway. So it's just kind of a little bit of an overview of that. And of course, they explain it based on, for defense purposes and why they've got all these universities working on this. But keep in mind all of the consumer spin-offs, and keep in mind some of the specific phrases that we read out of this, okay? And as I go through, we're talking about neurons, we're talking about electrical signals, we are talking about nonlinear response of neurons, some of the highlights out of some of these words, optical path length changes in neural tissue corresponding with neural activity, and then neuromodulation, combining that interplay, which I'm still trying to wrap my head around, ultrasound and magnetic fields generating localized electric currents for neuromodulation. And then I got an example for you. Yep. Where you go?
Okay. So if you were to induce ultrasound in bone,
okay,
right, we bounce electromagnetic energy off the bone, and you induce an ultrasonic resonance or an ultrasonic wave in bone.
You could excite some immune cells or stem cells.
Who knows what it's yeah. At the cellular level, who knows? It could do probably a lot of things based on how it resonated and what you were doing with it. But
right,
there's your there's your ultrasound right there, generating an ultrasonic wave. Well, your bone is going to resonate, potentially make an ultrasound wave that's going to then push that energy out through your tissues. And so it'll disrupt, if you will, whatever is going on. It will induce a change if you have, for example, electromagnetic energy hitting your bone. I forgot where I was going with that, but it doesn't matter.
Well, back to those highlight words. I think we pretty well covered them all. And now, keeping in the back of your mind some of these particles that are being designed and what they can do and what you can use them for and how small they are and where you can get them to and what potential there is. We're talking about superparamagnetic iron oxide particles for one, but I wouldn't say that that's the only one. There are probably going to be other particles which are superparamagnetic but may not be made of just plain iron. There might be something else too. So you've got a lot of small stuff that can be imported into an organism and parked in particular locations. And if I just put this thing back up, there was one other thing here. Try to find what it was. One more good little phrase there. Hang on 1 second. We'll have it. Okay, but where was that other phrase? Oh, yes, the magnetogenetic approach. This little phrase right here. Magnetogenetic approach. Okay, who is doing this and how are they doing it? And once you open up that realm of using a magnetogenetic approach to modify the function of a cell, neurons are one type of cell, but you could modify the functionality of a different type of cell using that magnetogenetic approach. So as soon as we say genetic, we're not talking about just using magnetics to take an existing natural cell and vibrate it or resonate it or alter it or do whatever. We're talking about magnetogenetic approach. So there's some really good keywords in here that give us a clue how powerful some of this stuff may be. Anyway, yeah, just a little bit of a highlight of that. And small magnetic fields correlate with neural activity. Yep. Very interesting stuff. I've got more. I have a couple of short videos that we could go through also. And I don't want to get into lipid encapsulated nanoparticles. That would be a slightly different subject. So I don't kind of want to go in that direction. Have another interesting video, but it's kind of long. Where would you like to go forward at this point?
Man, if you want to show some videos, we can. If you don't, I've got a couple tabs open. We can look at some more words. But, I mean, we've been looking at text. We've been looking at, just the same screen image for a while. So maybe videos would be useful.
Yeah, we can do that.
Yeah.
We can do that.
Otherwise, I've got a patent that talks about biocompatible, generally recognized as safe, biocompatible polymers that, self-assemble. Anyway.
All right. Well, I got a little video that I'll play here. And this one is, I'm only going to want to go with pieces of this. So let's see. Let me pull to this part. And the speaker, her diagrams are excellent, but the audio on the speaking was not as much as clear as I would like it. But let me get this loaded, test it, make sure it's going to play. Okay, it looks like it's going to play. And we've already listed this one on a previous episode, and we got through about half of it. I'm going to go with a little bit more of this one right now. And let's see. It should work. Okay. But let's zoom it in so it looks a little better for you. All right. This was Noor Al-Rawi And as you can see from the progress bar on that, we made it through about halfway through this thing previously. And the whole purpose of this in our last inclusion of it was, once again, in highlighting all of the possible uses of magnetic nanoparticles. And I just got to encourage everybody, go out there and check out what a lot of people are talking about. And, you know, some of it's anecdotal, some of it is just their speculation, but expose yourself to it and see what you think of it yourself for entertainment purposes only. And then dare to ask the question where we might be headed in terms of potential changes to our environment with the development of the use of more and more magnetic nanoparticles, of one being iron oxide, but as you can see from this title, other metal ferrites, in other words, other alloys. And she's talking about drug delivery systems. But once you've got these particles in there and you can do something where you can electromagnetically activate them to do something else proximal to a cellular structure or an intracellular structure, kind of the sky's the limit if you know what you're doing and you've got it targeted the way that you want it. So let's listen to her for a few minutes. Very interesting lady. And this is Noor Al-Rawi. Here she goes.
The tumor, and this allows the high molecular weight drugs as well as prodrugs to act selectively on the tumor. And despite the fact that passive diffusion has served very nicely in multiple applications, it is still considered to be of poor reliability.
So first thing she's talking about is this technology versus passive diffusion. Passive diffusion would be you get an injection of something and it just goes all over your body and it's not targeted in any way. And the other thing that she's talking about is the purpose of her angle on this is pretty much in treatment of cancers, various sorts of cancer. So that's her purpose for the targeting, and she's very excited about being able to target drug delivery for that reason.
Active targeting is more controlled and provides reproducible delivery patterns to the target. It happens due to either a stimulus or surface functionalization. Therapeutic application.
So if you saw that one last little panel, let me see if I can back it up 5 seconds.
In cancer.
Yeah, it's
happens
right
due to either a stimulus or surface functionalization.
Right there, this term. Optosonization. Opsonization. That was the last one that lit up right there.
Therapeutic applications in cancer. The current trend in the design of new drug delivery systems. So
we've been talking all about this this magnetic nanoparticle platform, and one embodiment of that would be a superparamagnetic iron oxide nanoparticle. But with that, what can you do? Cell stimulation. You can probably use these things to enhance imaging because they're going to show up in different ways if you have your optical equipment in place, or therapeutic drug delivery. Let her go on.
Call for the design of a multifunctional system. The use of MNPs in the biomedical field can be divided into 3 subcategories: diagnostic uses, therapeutic uses, and theranostic uses. Now, this presentation will focus on one example of the diagnostic, but will put more attention towards the therapeutics, such as the use of magnetic nanoparticles in gene delivery, in the hyperthermia, as well as the theranostic applications.
Did she say what? Did you catch that, TMC? I'm going to back this up again 10 seconds. Please bear with me.
Hyperthermia, therapeutics, such as the use of magnetic nanoparticles in gene delivery, in the
She said gene delivery, didn't she? You with me?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, she actually said gene delivery. Okay, I thought I caught that right.
Hyperthermia, as well as the theranostic applications. MNPs and Alzheimer's. When it comes to the pathophysiology of the disease, Alzheimer's is a progressive neurodegenerative disorder characterized by the accumulation of amyloid plaques and neurofibrillary tangles that lead to neuron degeneration and consequently brain atrophy. It contributes to 60 to 80% of all the dementia cases, starting with the cognitive function loss in the early stages, followed by the motor function loss in the more advanced stages.
It's an interesting point she made. It's kind of peripheral. I wasn't intending to talk about Alzheimer's, but she said that the formation of plaques, which are the hallmark of Alzheimer's disease, correspond to 60 to 80% of all dementia cases in whatever the scope of which she was looking at. Might be worldwide, might be nationwide in the US. I don't really know. But whatever is, in some way, by whatever method, and we're not here to in any way try to propose medical, legal, political, or financial advice, but in whatever way, one might want to learn more about how those plaques, which are coatings, non-functional coatings on the inner walls of surfaces, important vessel surfaces, tend to accumulate, then one might want to make it one's business to mitigate the development of such plaques. And I say this only for completely non-medical reasons, just offering the idea that someone might want to inquire about that and look into how to either mitigate or discourage the formation of such plaques. And this is based on the statistics that she indicated, which is that 60 to 80% of all dementia cases are the result of the formation of those plaques. I'll let her continue.
Stages. Either cases, the patient will be reliable on other people to help him perform even the most basic life activities. The irreversible nature of the disease requires the establishment of sensitive diagnostic tests. Here, curcumin-loaded MNPs can serve as a visualizing tool with the aid of MRI imaging. The property of curcumin to bind to the amyloid plaques allows the early detection of Alzheimer's disease patients before even developing the cognitive changes. The results show that curcumin-loaded MNPs showed low toxicity profiles and a success.
I think you guys can figure out where she's going with this, right? She's talking about the extreme benefits of being able to use iron oxides and metal ferrites, both for imaging and diagnostic purposes, as well as perhaps for some associated part of a delivery mechanism to something to help mitigate these plaque formations resulting in Alzheimer's disease. I'm not sure exactly what she's talking about, and I've got two options, TMC. I could let her continue, in which case it might become more clear as she goes on, or we can jump to something else if you'd like. What would you like to do?
She's very interesting. I mean,
I'm going to go a little further ahead.
Yeah,
I'm going to jump just a little bit. Hopefully, Noor Al-Rawi will forgive me for jumping a little bit further in her video, but I do have the link in our show notes so you can watch the whole thing if you'd like.
These magnetic nanoparticles were shown to be non-toxic, and they usually clear out from the body within a few weeks.
Non-toxic magnetic nanoparticles, which do their job and clear out from the body in a few weeks. The ones that she and her lab have designed do that.
I have a question.
That doesn't mean that all magnetic nanoparticles will clear out of the body in a period of a few weeks. Yes.
So where do they go?
They're excreted. I'm sure they're eliminated either by the kidneys or the rest of the digestive tract, and they go into the waste disposal system. They go into the public sewage treatment plant. That
or
type
through
of
sweating or through
you could sweat them out.
And,
Yes.
Think of if you had it. If the magnetic nanoparticles move through the salivary systems, you could put them in the digestive tract to then be excreted if you were to put them through the salivary system. Because you would use that to eat food, right?
All possible.
Could it also be excreted in sexual juices?
The thing about this, yes. Absolutely. The thing about this is these particles are so small. We've talked about that once again in previous episodes. We've given you scale diagrams of how big they are and how small they are. But they're so small that they'll like readily circulate and suspend themselves in all sorts of fluids, whether they be in the fluid of saliva or any other bodily juice that you want to name, or whether they be in the fluid that is uptaken into a plant and becomes part of the structure of a plant, or whether they go out of your own personal waste removal system out into the environment and perhaps could get recirculated again.
Imagine making a biostable, biocompatible magnetic nanoparticle that was considered generally safe and non-toxic for a year.
Was considered that way, right?
For a year. And then you introduce it in the agricultural supply through a fungicide, pesticide, herbicide that ultimately is eaten by another livestock animal
something
or
in the
human.
food chain, right? Something in the food chain. Yep.
Right. Biocompatible for a year, put in a fungicide, herbicide, pesticide, for example.
Let me digress for just a second. Do you guys remember, if you're old like me, do you remember long ago they started coming out with plastics? And they came out with plastics that were so durable, and they were UV resistant, and they were tough, and they were strong. And they started coming out with these plastics that we had a lot of plastic that wouldn't break down in the landfills. And then they changed, they modified the chemical formula, a lot of these plastics, so that ultraviolet light would make them degrade, or that they would deteriorate. They would break down in the earth in landfills. So the two kinds of plastic. One was the kind of stuff that looked like it lasted forever. And then the other kind is a lot of the newer stuff that they now make, which does break down. So imagine if you were doing that with a nanoparticle. You could design it either way. You could make a nanoparticle that is going to be very, very durable, and it's going to have a life maybe longer than us. Or you could make a nanoparticle which has been built and designed to break down over either a very short period, maybe a day or two, or a few weeks or whatever. Anyway, that was my little digression. Go on, TMC.
Well, that's it. I look at this stuff and, think about industrial applications. How would you introduce the various components into the general ecosystem? How do you do that?
Make them durable.
Go ahead.
This is assuming you know what you want to do.
Yeah.
Make them durable. Make them so that they will be able to continue circulating over and over again, around and around in the environment.
If you follow the same formula, the same general playbook, what you would do is you would attach these things, for example, to genetic information or to nutritional components that a plant needs or an animal needs. Right. So that it is truly infused throughout the structure of the plant or the animal, so that when the structure that is of use to the next thing that eats it, when that structure is broken down, it will in turn be transferred to the new host's structure.
Right. Yep. They could be done either way. Question is, do we know? I mean, these things are being made, they're being researched, they're being built in labs, and they're being designed for purposes with an intent. Do we know what they are, what the life cycle of these things is that they're being designed to have built into them is? I don't. But I know, just as we demonstrated with that example of plastics, they made them. They didn't even realize that the accumulation of a lot of plastic was going to be a problem, so they changed it. So, but the point is that they can design chemical compounds to either break down or be extremely durable. There's some other thing too, some other industrial chemical. I can't remember the name of it. I think it has something to do with production of something in the Teflon industry, where this particular molecule is so durable, it'll last for an ungodly number of years, like thousands of years before it breaks down. And I don't know. But the point is, when we make stuff, and if we make something that's too durable and it's an artificial synthetic molecule and it gets out into the environment, it's going to be there for a long time. And in order to remediate or clean up from it could be highly expensive if we can even do it. Just saying. for entertainment.
Do you clean it up, or do you just understand that it's going to be useful for a year or two before it will degrade and ultimately toxify the environment, and you just don't give a shit?
Well, if it degrades, it could degrade into something non-toxic. It could degrade into something that no longer has the functionality, or it could degrade into something that is toxic, or it could not degrade at all and then recycle through the environmental cycle.
Right, exactly. So if you had a magnetic nanoparticle that was biostable for a year or two, and you put it into the food supply and people ate it and they pooped it out or they peed it out or whatever, and it went through the water supply, and then you recycle the water supply, and you filter out all the biological contaminants, but not necessarily down to the nanoscale because it's not industrially efficient.
Hard to do.
And you in turn then put that back into the municipal system where people then drink and shower with retreated water that then has nanotechnology in it. Well, if those biocompatible nanoparticles, right, are still useful, then you can over a period of time build up the general saturation of this stuff.
That's right. You can gradually increase the saturation of that until they're literally everywhere. And you just add to the supply, knowing that some degrade out, and you just the toxicity would become a known stabilized side effect that over a period of time you just know you're going to have this type of toxicity. So if you were to look at the long-term effects of, let's say stratospheric aerosol injections, if people were to look at that kind of a thing and start looking at what toxicity looks like with nanomaterials. Are there correlations or not? I don't know. It would be very interesting to me to see whether or not there are correlations to 10 years of whatever it is they're spraying, and then looking at whatever studies have been done in small cell cultures where you apply barium salts or strontium salts or whatever to the biologic tissue and see what it does, and then make those correlations and see what it's doing to plants, animals, and people for that matter. Agreed. There are things to be aware of. And
I bet the paramagnetic nanoparticles, not being necessarily made of iron oxide only, but of other things as well, I bet when those things catch on fire, like in a forest, they burn 10 times hotter, for example.
Some of them do.
Yeah. Yes. Wouldn't it be cool to drop nanotech all over a forest and then have the water deliver it into the systems of the trees that are now going to live for another 50 to 100 years, so that you can run electromagnetic communication systems through your national forests over the course of 5 years? For example, you could drop nanoparticulate out of the air and totally connect. You could interconnect with something like the Siberian forest. The Russians experimented with this, and they painted trees. They actually took material and put it inside paint, and they painted the trunks of the trees, and they ran radio comms. It wasn't very good. I don't know if it's viable or not, but I'm providing you this anecdote simply as an example. This was a long time ago. If you could do this with nanotech, where something like the root system is able to uptake the nanotech through the normal nutrient and hydration functions of something like a tree, and then you can start talking to the nanotech once it's saturated throughout the proverbial tissues of the tree, why not run radio comms through your forests and build sensor networks? You wouldn't even need to I'm going to have the internet for the Department of Forest Service, so we're going to spray nanotech all. No. It's more like just general sensors. What could you do with a very low energy sensor system in a tree? Would you be able to understand when an animal walked by a tree, if that tree now emitted and was able to be measured, right? A magnetic field, for example, from a tree.
It's not impossible. It's not, part of one of the things we come back to is we say science fiction comes true. Well, first of all, if you can dream up the concept of it, then it's probably possible by some means. Secondly, some of that science fiction may not come true, at least not in a short term, not in one lifetime, but some of it does and has come true. And if there's a purpose for developing some of this technology and using it and refining it, then you know that people are working on it, and you know that they've got a purpose. So when what we show you here at Cyberhuman Frontiers is things that are being worked on and therefore have a purpose. And they, 10 years ago, to me, they would have sounded like utter science fiction, but they're actually not. And they're being done for a reason. And you always want to ask yourself why. And, what's the advantage? What's the disadvantage? How does this benefit me and you? Or how does this potentially put us at risk? And these are things for you to think about. It's kind of why we have these discussions and show you the patents, the research, and the primary and secondary investigators that are doing this work, and the engineers helping them, build this stuff. That's why we do it. Could anything that you just said be possible? Yeah. If you wanted to turn a forest of trees into some sort of an antenna structure, you could do it internally through their vascular system rather than doing it primitively by painting the outside of the trees like they did in that experiment you mentioned. You could do it much more elegantly than that. And you could do it, doesn't have to be just with a tree. You could do it with organisms also.
Yeah, I mean, if you were going to do it to the trees, you're gonna do it to all the animals too. And at that point, what is a satellite grid? What does a satellite array system look like when you're looking at a forest, right? If you're looking at a forest and you're not using light, you're using microwaves or you're using millimeter waves to look at a forest, and you spent a number of years dropping specifically formulated magnetic particles, for example, paramagnetic particles, ferromagnetic particles, antiferromagnetic whatever
into that forest, right? And you're gradually building up the concentration in there until you've got it
into everything.
So you've got it.
What happens to your radar? Think about what a radar system looks like when you can start tracking something like an eagle's brain, or a squirrel's brain, or a rabbit's brain, or a bear's brain. Think about what surveillance looks like if you had a connected forest. And I know it sounds like Fern Gully or whatever other corny ass movie you want to think about, but just if you had the ability to disperse something that once it was inserted into something else that was alive, right, you could then map it and at a minimum understand that unique mapped structure moving around in three-dimensional space. At a minimum, just be able to watch it move around. You would be able to start cataloging and tracking the migratory habits of something like squirrels, zebras, to whatever, man. To whatever. You could address an entire herd of buffalo, because the way the nanotech was assimilated in the muscle structures of buffalo number 1 versus buffalo number 2 is just a little bit different. The way it got there is the same. They sprayed some stuff out of the sky. It got into the water and the grass. They drank the water and ate the grass, and it went into all their tissues, because that's what they use, water and grass, so they grow up and be what they are, in this case, a buffalo.
Yep.
That's now been infused with something they've been spraying in the air, for example, for a number of years, and they're on the grid at that point. You're not using cameras from the satellites. Mind you, you're using microwaves and millimeter waves and other directed energy systems.
It really could be done.
Absolutely. That was the whole Smart Dust program, and the Smart Dust program and the rollout of that. When 9/11, and we're gonna go to Iraq because Saddam did it, but let's go to Afghanistan first and completely screw up the economic whatever was going on over there, just to be dicks and disrupt the whole European theater. Anyway, go ahead.
Yeah, no, it's interesting conversation, right? And the speculations are not idle poppycock. It's not total crazy stuff.
You know what they did with that program, right?
No.
They had some programs, DARPA, right? Had programs to build smart dust systems that were functional for like 2 days. And these are initial programs that were declassified. And really what it consisted of was being able to deploy something out of a drone or an airplane or whatever that had a power supply on it good for the amount of time it's dark. And then ultimately the program evolved so that the things could be recharged. So you had a 2 to 5, 7-day life cycle on something that you dropped out of the back of an airplane that, and, particulates, small particulates that when landing on the sand in the desert became little beacons. And you ultimately got a topographical map of passive sensors that recharged during the day and provided very sophisticated topographical information, troop movements, and all kinds of stuff of good guys and bad guys, because you had this really cool technology that was known as smart dust. And they use a lot of that. And that's now been sophisticated even further into self-powering mechanisms that, as you see on your screen, when inserted into the body, could provide something like a smart dust ideology, a smart dust platform inside your body down to the cellular and the subcellular level, and have it talk to the internet.
I can see how that would work if one overlaid a daytime topographical map of the area, and then that smart dust is transmitting that same topographical all night. Then if somebody walks across that topographical area, they'll create a shadow. They'll obstruct some of the output from the smart dust, and you'll be able to track, whatever the shape and size of the object and velocity of it is as it obstructs the beams from the smart dust. And they run all night, they discharge, and then sunlight charges them up again the next day. And the topography is the same, but the movements of the, whoever the people are that they were trying to track, that'll change all the time. So you can basically see at night. That's really cool. I didn't know that much about that until you explained it just now.
Yeah, and that's just one type of the technology. So if you were to take things that charged and discharged, same thing with the sun, for example, in a desert environment, maybe they didn't or don't emit electromagnetics in the scale of microwaves or millimeter waves. Maybe they emit other types of energy that when you look at them over a long period of time from a satellite, you are able to see those known repeatable signatures that give you the radar field of view, computer vision, if you will. So it's one thing to put out a sensor network and have computers understand and read it. It's an entirely different thing to take that information and put it in a context or a visual diagram or a visual illustration that people understand. Useful tactical information in this example. We're talking about smart dust being used and to some extent perfected on the battlefield after 9/11, but that's all been, that was a long time ago. Now this stuff is potentially, in your water supply. So bottoms up.
Yeah. But few minutes that we got left, let me go to one other little segment of this from Dr. Noor Al-Rawi, where she talks about this little diagram that I have up on the screen, just a term, magnetofection. What does she mean by that? And I'm going to back it up just a little bit, and we got a few minutes left, and let's see what she explains to us about this. And of course, her whole angle is for disease prevention and cancer elimination and that kind of thing. But the concept to come away from it with this is just her explanation of what magnetofection is. And she's talking about iron oxides, metal ferrites, etc.
May limit their repeated use. Electroporation is another very effective method when it comes to delivering the genes. However, the electric impulses can actually lead to unmeasured or hard to estimate cytotoxicity. Alternatively, non-viral gene vectors have been suggested, yet sadly, there is only very little that they can do. Gene vectors.
I gotta just back this up for a second here.
Alternatively,
and try to enlarge this a little bit so that you can see it better. Okay, so she's talking about a viral vector for a transfection, and we're talking about magnetofection, which is basically getting something magnetic into what we're looking at right here, which is a strand of either a double helix of DNA. It's genes. It's a genetic strand, put it that way. So it's hard for me to read this, so it might be harder for you, but I'll try to read it. Delivering therapeutic genes, expression modulation, and in the case of making cancer cells go away, adding in a suicide gene into the code of the cells of the cancer cells. And so she's talking about various vectors to get it in there. Viral vector, which would be transduction, and then a non-viral vector, which she would call transfection, interestingly. And then down at the bottom of this, it reads polymer selection. Yes, choosing the particular polymer which is going to be more readily absorbable and transmittable through that cell membrane and into that target piece of genetic code where you're trying to get it to, so that you can deliver that suicide gene. So picking the polymer that has the nice absorptivity characteristics that you want so that you can enhance, I'm reading here, enhance the transfection of the payload nucleic acids into the cell. And then over here, it gets a little more technical than what I'm familiar with. I'm going to read it, but it doesn't necessarily mean I understand it. Proton sponge phenomenon, which is escaping lysosomal degradation to release the gene of interest. Oh, okay. All right. Right. All right. So in other words, I think what it means is the outer coat of something, once it pops off, then that releases the gene of interest, hopefully into the area where you were trying to get it. And then lastly, magnetic field, static field versus oscillating fields and their effects on transfection efficiency. So it's a lot for us to try to bring and translate it into a language that both that you and we can understand it at a layman's level of language. But once again, we're looking at oscillating magnetic fields versus static magnetic fields. And you can be almost certain that an oscillating magnetic field of a properly selected frequency is going to optimize the absorption and the delivery of this particular little gene segment that she's talking about, which is going to do this purpose. And her whole thing is wiping out cancer cells. But think of all the other applications. If you've got this mechanism, these various methods in place whereby you can deliver genetic code to genetic molecules such as DNA, then what else could you do with it? Anyway, let's see what else she says here.
Non-viral gene vectors have been suggested, yet sadly, there is only very little that they can do on their own, and they are usually of low efficiency. Using superparamagnetic nanoparticles for that purpose, with the application of an external magnetic field, served as a turning point in nanoscale delivery of genes. They were shown.
Okay, so she just said it, using superparamagnetic nanoparticles and utilizing them in the presence of a specifically chosen magnetic field, most likely an oscillating magnetic field, EM.
To have pronounced transfection and the power to potentiate the efficacy up to several hundred folds, lessening long durations to be a matter of minutes. While designing a delivery system for genes, attaching specific target linkers can be an...
So she's talking about upping the efficiency of the absorption and delivery of these particular magnetic nanoparticles by way of using electromagnetics. It really enhances making that stuff get where you want it to get to.
Interesting approach. Yet unfortunately, it is not always applicable. A popular alternative was the employment of the cationic polymer polyethylene-imine, PEI, which contains secondary amines to form electrostatic interactions with the negative phosphate backbone of DNA. The principle...
In case anybody is interested, cationic polymer would be something negatively charged. Cations are negative, anions are positive, in case you're interested.
advantage is its ability to reduce the vector's dose and transfection time due to the rapid sedimentation of gene particle complex onto the target tissue. The mechanism by which PEI-coated magnetic nanoparticles escape the lysosomal degradation following their internalization has been heavily debated in a number of publications. Many have attributed it to the proton sponge hypothesis, which supports PEI buffering capacity in increasing the intralysosomal pH, causing their rupture and content release. The application of a proper magnetic field can have a considerable effect on the final successfulness of the system. For example, a static magnetic field can increase the transfection efficiency and can increase the delivery of the genes towards the targeted tissues. However, if we are using an oscillating magnetic field, then the transfection efficiency of the genes will increase up to 10 times that.
So you see what hopefully you can understand. Is the audio coming across on her okay, TMC?
Yeah, it sounds great.
So what she's talking about is, I mean, you know, people really know that utilizing oscillating electromagnetic fields in combination with these purpose-designed nanoparticles really makes them get absorbed the way that you want them to, and many-fold better, better efficiency of getting them where you want them to be and hopefully do what they were designed to do.
Compared to the static magnetic field. It was presumed that oscillating magnetic fields provided more energy to the system, which improved the uptake of particles as well as aided in tissue penetration.
Right. Oscillating magnetic fields add energy to the system. Yes, they do. They deliver energy. Some of it ends up turned into electricity. Some of it will end up turned into, depending on the frequency you use, into mechanical energy even, and heat, and that some of that can translate into generating heat. All of these things. But her point being that they're not going to just use a static magnetic field. They're going to use an electromagnetic field, and they can elevate or decrease the intensity of that and the frequency of it, and it allows them to do a whole lot more stuff in terms of navigating and potentiating the nanoparticles that they've got into that organism.
This slide represents illustrations of MNP's magnetofaction. Combines a diagnostic feature alongside a therapeutic trait, it then gets promoted to hold the title theranostic. Theranostics have gained wide attention over the years as attractive systems to improve cancer therapy.
Okay, theranostics, integrating image, boy, I wish this was larger, integrating imaging to foster monitoring of real-time positioning and distribution and to support individualized patient therapy. Okay, so better real-time positioning and better, most likely more targeted distribution of the magnetic nanoparticles. That's what it's about. So this is the field. I don't know who invented it. Maybe somebody that she works with. They've field named theranostics. Okay.
No, I don't. That's a general field. And what she said about it was that it's this combination between therapy and diagnostics. So the cool part about that is you deliver systems that are able to give you feedback while delivering the therapy at the same time. So you deliver the therapy and the feedback system that then tells you how well the therapy is going, all in this in a single system, if you will. I'm simplifying that dramatically.
It's more of a buzzword. It's more of a buzzword. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's not a technology. Yep.
You could do right. You could apply a few different things over the course of, let's say, 2 hours and call it theranostics.
Yep.
Doesn't all have to be in like a single.
Point well made. Yep.
Yeah.
Let's see how she wraps up on this here.
Techniques to foster the monitoring of real-time positioning and distribution of the nanoparticles, as well as to support the individuality in patients' therapies. The imaging is performed non-invasively, allowing timely assistance and treatment modifications for the cancer patients. Theranostic nanoparticles also have the ability to carry either single or multiple therapeutics, for example, chemotherapeutics, small-sized particles, photosensitizers, as well as genes. One of my favorite studies conducted by Link et al. Illustrates the use of pH-sensitive magnetic nanogrenades in targeting the tumor cells. The acidic microenvironment of the tumor evokes their deassembling to release the MRI contrast and fluorescent agents that aids the detection of small tumors having a 3 millimeter diameter.
Yeah, so what she's talking about here is better imaging to the point where they can detect not just a pea-sized or a blob-sized segment of cancerous cells, but almost down to the cellular level by way of improving the imaging. And the other thing that she just said was not only having your ferromagnetics operating, but also have packaged, piggybacked along with that, a chemotherapeutic agent, a drug, basically a tiny, tiny, tiny bit of a poison that you bring right to the right place so that it gets released right at the cancer cell. Fascinating stuff. And we're just about out of time. So takeaways from this, sum up, if you could with me a little bit on takeaways from this. Nanoparticulate technology, when you combine it with the magnetic characteristics and those properties, and in the word that we've been using, SPIONS, which would be pronounced spion, which stands for superparamagnetic iron oxide particle. There's so much that can be done with these things, and you can do some good things, you can do some bad things, you can do all kinds of things with them. Anyway, your version of the sum up for today?
It was really nice spending 2 hours with you.
Super good, super good. And not to ignore what was going on out in the chat. Just know that when I've got screens up sharing, I can read the chat, but I can't reply to it. It messes everything up. So we did touch a little bit on Teflon. Teflon is really great stuff as long as it stays where you put it and you never wind up getting it uptaken into your body, because it does nasty things in there. And so that was a little bit of commentary about Teflon, and just a whole lot. It's good to see the whole crew out there, and we're going to leave you a little bit in suspense for next week, because we kind of reached a point in talking about superparamagnetics at this point that you now know what all of the possible applications of this are. And Dr. Some, right. Dr. Noor Al-Rawi did broach the subject for us in talking about the genetic piece, all right, in using them to help to target and deliver little pieces of genetic code. In the case that she was talking about, where it was cancer cells, she's talking about we need to use this paramagnetic iron oxide particle to deliver a suicide gene to a cancer cell. And that's because she's all about cancer treatment and cancer therapy. So that's her thing. But you can use those particles to deliver another type of gene code. It doesn't have to be a suicide gene. It could be an enhancement gene for some sort of a function, whatever it might be, or an alteration to the operation and the modulation of neurons. It could be for a whole lot of different things. And I think you guys are getting the idea. And it's very good. It's very exciting. It's very encouraging. And I'm going to shut up now. So TMC, take us out of here, man.
See you next week.